Hello all, welcome to Abhiram IAS Academy. Let us go through the daily chronicles of January 20, 2025. So this is the first article. You can find this on Indian Express, page 9, The Welfare That India Needs. So the author is Ashok Gulati. He is the chairman of CACP, that is Commission on Agricultural Cost and Prices from 2011 to 2014. Okay. He is also heading IFPRI, that is International Food Policy Research Institute. So we will go through the article. So it discusses in detail about the agricultural price policy and reforms which are pending. So what are different stages in farming? So these are different stages in farming: sowing, adding manure and fertilizers, irrigation, weeding, pest and disease control, harvesting, post-harvesting and marketing, okay, including your transportation. So these are different stages. So agricultural price policy is relevant for sowing because it incentivizes some production, like particular crops will be incentivized through MSP, like your rice and wheat. So it is important for this, and also at the marketing stage, okay, it is where the farm produce will be connected to the consumer. So it will be important for both farmer and also consumer. So both these stages are relevant for pricing. So agricultural price policy. So agricultural price policy is nothing but government measure to influence the prices of the agricultural products. So how does it influence the prices? It can have different interventions, like your MSP, that is minimum support price, which will be offered to some crops. Right now it is for 23 crops, okay, after the 2000 agricultural policy. Then there will also be procurement policies which will ensure stable supply for your functioning of PDS, that is public distribution system, which is nothing but a government agency that ensures distribution of essential food and other items to the eligible households, okay. So that is your rice, wheat, sugar or kerosene. All this will be distributed by the PDS. So it needs some supply on a stable manner. So that will be ensured by the government procurement policies, and this procurement happens at MSP. So that's how it is linked. Then we also have subsidies for different farm inputs because they will reduce the cost and encourage production. So what are different subsidies given? It can be for your fertilizer, okay, electricity, any kind of high yielding variety seeds. So different farm inputs will be given such subsidies by the government to encourage production and reduce the burden on the farmer. So these are different government intervention to support farmer. So what is the significance of this agricultural policies? So basically it will ensure food security because of your PDS also, and it also protects the farmers from volatility in the market. So there may be sudden surge or fall in the market prices because the farm produce, all of which will be harvested in one season. So because of which there will be fluctuations in the prices. So to protect the farmers from such volatility, government has come up with such policies. So let us understand the evolution of MSP, that is your minimum support price. So in 1965, it began its journey with Green Revolution, okay. To encourage some food production, the Green Revolution has introduced MSP first in 1966-67 with your wheat, mainly to boost the production of the wheat. Then in 1970s, rice was also included under MSP. This is because it is a staple food, and to ensure food security, rice was also included in this. And in 1980s, we have some level of diversification, that is pulses, coarse cereals and oil seeds were also included under MSP in 1980s. And in 2018, we have adopted a new formula. Initially, it was A2 and later it was modified to A2 plus FL, okay. The formula right now is 1.5 of A2 plus FL, that is your family labor. And in 2020s, we have farm laws, and which were repealed also because of the farmers' protest. And there is ongoing debate on the legalization of MSP. Let us have a look at different cost components in the agricultural pricing. So initially, it was A2 till 2018, and now we have A2 plus FL. So this is also called as C1, your comprehensive cost one, and Swaminathan committee has recommended for C2 plus 50%. So this is what the farmers are demanding now. So what is A2? A2 includes numerous costs like this. That is your paid out cost. So out of your pocket, whatever you have spent for your inputs like fertilizers, seeds, even the labor wages are all included in this. Okay. And A2 plus FL is, it includes the family labor also. The family may be participating in the farming, but it doesn't receive any specific rent for that or wages for that. So these costs are invisible, but they are included in A2 plus FL. However, it doesn't include these two. So these two are included in your C2, that is comprehensive cost 2. What are they? Owned land rent. So you may be owning a land, you need not pay any rent for it. So this cost is also included in C2, and your owned capital. So you may own some farm machinery equipment for which you need not pay any rent. So that is also included in your C2. So you can have a detailed look on these various cost components. So this is A1, which has only the basic cost. Okay. It doesn't have the land rent if it is leased, which is included in your A2. Okay. So that is the difference. The rest of the things we have discussed in the previous slide. Next. What are the challenges with MSP? So MSP is distorting the markets. Why do we say that? Because it encourages only production of few crops. That means they will be overproduced, which means other crops will be underproduced. So this is creating artificial inflation of some food crops. Okay. And there also will be over procurement by food corporation without sufficient storage. Okay. Because the procurement is mandatory, FCI cannot say no. So it just procures everything it gets, and it is leading to a lot of wastage because it is procuring at least 2 to 3 times more than necessary. Without any storage infrastructure, this is leading to a lot of wastage. Then it also imposes heavy fiscal burden on the government. For example, in 2014, it costed around 1.06 lakh crore for the government for this MSP procurement, but in 2022-23, it has risen to 2.28 lakh crore, which is significant. Then also there is a criticism that it has limited beneficiaries. That is, it benefits only few, not everyone. Because according to a research study by Arcus Policy Research in 2018-19, only 9% of farmers in India have actually sold their produce at MSP. Okay. So very few farmers are benefiting, and it is also leading to a lot of regional disparities. So few states may be having well-developed procurement mechanisms, but not all states have that. For example, in Bihar especially, the procurement system is highly underdeveloped, because of which the farmers sell the produce to the local vendors at very low prices. So it doesn't benefit the small farmers also, small and marginal farmers. Why? Because they cannot afford the high transportation costs they need to incur while taking their produce to this procurement place. So that is one reason. Then it also has some environmental concerns. Why do we say that? So it leads to groundwater depletion. So because MSP is for few crops like rice and sugarcane, these are heavily intensive irrigation crops. Okay. What do we mean by intensive irrigation? It consumes lot of water. Okay, it needs lot of water. So this leads to groundwater depletion, and also it can lead to soil degradation, because you are producing same crop every year just to grab the MSP. So that means you need the same inputs, fertilizers, seeds, everything. So that leads to soil degradation because soil turns acidic. Okay, with continuous application of ammonium fertilizers through urea subsidies, it becomes acidic and the pH will be low, because of which some essential micronutrients or macronutrients like calcium and magnesium cannot be obtained by the soil. And also it harms the soil microbes which can fix the nitrogen. So that is also one criticism. It also imposes heavy burden on the government also. So a urea bag may cost 2,200 rupees, but the farmer pays only 242 rupees. That means the government is paying the rest. That is 1958 rupees is spent by the government for this. So it is costing around 3.68 lakh crore. The whole fertilizer subsidy burden is 3.68 lakh crore in 2022-23. So you can understand the fiscal burden incurred by the government by this example. Besides, it also leads to a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. Why do we say that? Because rice releases a lot of methane. Okay. And your fertilizers, continuous application of higher amount of fertilizers, release lot of nitrous oxide. Okay. even in some areas like Punjab and Haryana and UP, we can see some stubble burning because they want to clear the land for the next crop, okay, next season. So because of which they are releasing a lot of CO2 also. All these greenhouse gases are releasing and they are contributing to your global warming. So that is another criticism. And also, farmers are heavily relying on the government support. They don't have any risk appetite to experiment any new things or new technology, new crops, or any kind of high value crops like fruits, organics. So this is discouraging farmers from experimenting also. So from exploring sustainable and market driven options. So these are the challenges because of the MSP. So how do we reform? The author says we need to focus on some things. So let us have a look at the reforms suggested by Ashok Gulati. Okay. He says the prices should in reality be determined by demand and supply, but the government is intervening continuously through this MSP, subsidies, and also your FCA procurement. All these are leading to a lot of inefficiency and distortion and inefficient allocation of resources also, besides damaging the environment and farmers' long-term interest. So, he says you have to first avoid legalizing MSP because this will institutionalize all the challenges we have discussed so far, that is your market distortion, regional disparities, storage and wastage, environmental concerns. So, all these will be institutionalized if we legalize the MSP. So, that is the concern. And he says you have to free up the prices of both inputs and outputs. What are inputs here? Pure fertilizers, electricity, okay, or any kind of seed subsidies. They should be freed. That means the subsidies should be phased down eventually. Then outputs. What are the outputs? Nothing but your crop produce, that is rice and wheat. So he is arguing a case for gradual phase out of MSP. So why should we free up the prices of inputs? Okay. Because it reduces overuse or resource wastage. For example, in Netherlands, when the farmers were taken away from the price support mechanism of the government, we can actually see an improvement in the water use or resource use efficiency and also judicious use by the farmers. So this can be replicated in India also. And we have seen the groundwater extraction is huge because it has to support the intensive rice irrigation. So we can reduce this wastage and improve the water use efficiency and also adopt some latest advances like sprinkler and drip irrigation also. Free electricity subsidy is another reason for groundwater exploitation because it promotes unrestricted use of groundwater. So there is no cost on the farmer, okay. He can extract as much water as he wants, okay. And majority of the irrigation is because of the borewell or tube well irrigation in India, not canal or other tanks. Okay, so because of this, there is huge groundwater depletion. So we can save this also. And farmers can also try new alternatives when they are experimenting and away from MSPs. It will boost their risk appetite. So they can invest in alternative techniques and inputs also. So this is another advantage. And it also frees up a lot of fiscal burden on the government. So these are the advantages if you free your input prices. Okay, then what are the implications of freeing the prices of the outputs, that is basically phasing out the MSP? It will lead to crop diversification because MSP is only for certain crops. It is encouraging the production only in those crops, not in other, because of which we can see inflation in other crops. So we can fight this, okay. This will ensure the crop diversification. For example, a UK-based research study, that is Structural Transformation and Economic Growth research study, has studied that deregulation of fertilizers prices in India can actually shift the cropping pattern away from rice and wheat towards cotton and oilseeds. So this is one advantage. You can also quote this. Then market determined prices can reduce the need for procurement also, and whatever the amount the government is saving because of this can be actually freed for other developmental initiatives. You can actually invest in agricultural R&D and other areas which need real attention. So also FCA is procuring lot of things, okay, more than its capacity. We can avoid this also and save lot of wastage. Then fixed prices make Indian farm produce also globally uncompetitive. The prices are high because of the fixed floor price given by this MSP. So this is artificially hiking the prices in the market. So you can take advantage of the low prices and grab your exports opportunities and boost the export potential if we are free from this MSP. So farmers can also export more. Then farmers can also choose local agroclimatic crops suited to their lands. For example, in Punjab, actually rice is not suited to their agroclimate. The actual crops suited are wheat, maize, and bajra. So these are the actual suitable crops for Punjab, but it is resorting to rice cropping only because of MSP. So we can avoid such things also. So the author also talks about other reforms like land lease reforms. That is, you have to make it more open. Okay, you have to legalize the land leasing. It will safeguard the landowner's interest also, because he need not have any fear of loss of ownership, and also gives the tenants the opportunity to grab any institutional support given by the state. Okay, he can access the subsidies, he can access the lower interest loans. So all this can be possible if we legalize the land leasing and make it more open. So we can see this in Andhra Pradesh 2019 Land Leasing Act, which has significant benefits because of this. Usually MSP benefits landowners more than the landless or the tenants. So tenants will not be at benefit because there is no legalization of land leasing, and also they cannot access any state support, and landless farmers are usually at the mercy of their landowners. So it benefits more the landowners. Then it can also give flexibility to experiment with high value crops also. So in China, in rural areas, the small farmers actually gave their land on lease to the cooperatives or the corporates, from which they benefited hugely because the land they pooled have actually adopted advanced technology. Okay, because of which there is high level of productivity. Okay, and all such benefits were visible in China. So we can also have those benefits if we legalize this land leasing and make it more open. So the author says we have to move towards targeted subsidies and per hectare input subsidies. So per hectare schemes are nothing but your PM Kisan, okay, or your Raitu Bandhu. They come under this. So he's saying we have to shift from free grain distribution by the PDS system. Instead, we have to adopt the technology, that is DBT and JAM Trinity, which was already successful in eliminating or reducing lot of leakages. Okay, in a 2017 IFPRI study, that is International Food Policy Research Institute study, PDS leakages were 46%. This was significantly reduced after this. So with the per hectare subsidies, even the small farmers can also benefit because it is per hectare. Okay, so it is beneficial even for the small farmers. So we can also learn from the Brazil, which has reduced hunger and poverty not by free distribution but by DBT. So we can also quote that. Next, he also says we have to improve and adopt lot of technology and digitization. So with digitization, you can actually reduce the leakages, you can target your beneficiaries and reduce lot of wastage also. So whatever saved, okay, whatever the amount we save in this can actually be invested in areas that need attention, like your agricultural R&D and education of the farmer. Okay, there is a critical link missing, that is, so there is agricultural research going on, okay, but the farmer is completely unaware of this. Okay, this link is by agricultural extension services. So this link has to be strengthened. We can actually invest in this. We can also invest in other important things like irrigation, adopting all the technologies like sprinkler and drip irrigation, then also your water management practices and rural infrastructure, which will yield more benefits than continuing with the MSP. So this is the roadmap given for agricultural reforms by the author Ashok Gulati. So we need a policy overhaul, okay, and we need to invest the saved amount in other important areas, and also education and R&D need to be prioritized, and also end the populism. So what are these? Policy overhaul, that is agricultural pricing must be more towards market, okay, and we have to shift to targeted subsidies and adopt the technology in the process. Then investment, that is you have to focus on the rural infrastructure, roads, markets. So focus on these instead. So the third reform, that is investing in R&D to enhance the farmer productivity through research and training. we need to invest in research. Why? Because of your climate change. Okay, so that is, you need to invest in drought resistant varieties, okay, and also heat resistant varieties and salt resistant varieties, because of the salt water intrusion which is possible with sea level rise. The author also says we have to end the populism. So that is, you have to shift from the vote centric policies and move towards sustainable growth strategies. The MSP is not benefiting the farmers in the long run, and also the soil is degrading, and it also hurts the environment. So it is not beneficial. We have to move towards sustainable growth strategies, and politicians should not be fearful of the vote bank politics. So that's what the author says. Next article. So UCC is important step for national integration, says the former Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi. So this is relevant to your GS2 topic, Polity, Directive Principles of State Policy, and also your GS1, that is Indian Society, Diversity Issues. So let us go through Uniform Civil Code in detail. So why is it in the news? So the Chief Justice, that is former Chief Justice, has made a statement supporting this, but he also says government should build consensus and educate the sections which are opposing this Uniform Civil Code. And we have also seen the latest example. Uttarakhand has actually passed the Uniform Civil Code Bill in 2024, becoming the first state to have a Uniform Civil Code. Other states have also expressed interest in adopting Uniform Civil Code. They are Assam and Gujarat. And Goa is the existing example, that is, it initially has Common Civil Code through the Portuguese Civil Code of 1867, even before independence. So what is the background of Uniform Civil Code? Let us go through step by step. In 1840, the Lex Loci report of 1840 have actually advocated for uniform laws for offences, that is criminal offences, evidence and contracts, but not personal laws, because different religions have different personal laws. So the British were not interested to invoke anger among these religious groups. So they stayed away from this personal laws codification. And in 1941, B.N. Rao Committee also recommended for codification of Hindu laws. This will ensure equal rights for the women. And 1949, we have Ambedkar and K. Munshi also advocating for Uniform Civil Code for the reasons of secularism and equality. But in 1950, that is when we adopted the constitution, we included this as a non-mandatory provision, okay? That is non-enforceable directive principles of state policy, Article 44, okay? Why? Because lot of religious groups, that is both the Hindu religious groups and Muslim religious groups, have opposed the Uniform Civil Code, citing that it is infringing upon the religious freedom and it is very important for them. So it was included as optional under Article 44. So what is Uniform Civil Code? It is nothing but a single law governing all the personal aspects of the Indians, irrespective of their religious faiths. In what? Marriage, okay? Personal laws are governing the personal aspects, that is marriage, divorce, inheritance and adoption. So what is the constitutional provision? Article 44, Directive Principle of State Policy. So these are different personal laws governing different religious groups in India. So you can see Hindus, that includes Sikhs, Buddhists and Jains also. So all of them are governed by these laws. Then Muslims are governed by their separate laws, and Christians are governed by these laws, that is Indian Christian Marriage, Indian Divorce Act and Indian Succession Act. Then Parsis, okay, they also have their own marriage and divorce, but also Indian Succession Act, it is common for Christians, Parsis and Jews. Then any kind of interfaith marriages are governed by your Special Marriage Act, okay, and other secular aspects are governed by Indian Succession Act 1925. We also have some tribes and indigenous communities. They have their own customary laws. You can see this in Nagaland and Mizoram, okay, and also your 6th scheduled areas, that is your Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram, okay. So they have autonomous district councils. They have the power to legislate on these personal aspects, okay. So they also have this power. Next, let us have a look at judicial journey. That is, you can understand this as the conflict between the personal laws of different groups and the secular laws. Okay. Initially in 1985, we can see Shah Bano case. Okay. Shah Bano was 82-year-old woman who was unilaterally divorced by her husband, and she was denied maintenance just beyond the 3-month iddat period. Okay. But the Supreme Court said she can have the maintenance under Section 125 Criminal Procedure Code. But in 1986, the government has actually passed Muslim Women Act, which has actually restored the earlier position. That is, the Muslim women were denied the right to maintenance and they were limited to iddat period only. So in 1995, we can see Sarla Mudgal case. So what is this case? A Hindu man cannot simply marry another woman just because he is converted to Islam, because in Islam, you can have bigamy. Okay. So they are permitted by the personal laws. So the Supreme Court says you simply cannot claim the right to marry another woman without divorcing the first wife just because you are converted. So conversion doesn't automatically dissolve the first marriage. So Hindu men cannot remarry just because they are converted to another religion. So they have to get divorced first and then only they can remarry even if they are getting converted to some other religion. Then in 2003, we have John Vallamattam case. So in this case, the court struck down the Section 118 of Indian Succession Act. So what is this? If you want to donate any property to the Christian missionary for any charitable purposes, the will for this should actually be 12-month old. But this provision is discriminatory because it is not available for other religions. Okay. So that's why it was challenged as discriminatory, and the court has actually struck down this section. Okay. Then we have 2017 Shaira Bano case where the Supreme Court struck down the triple talaq as illegal because it violates the Article 14 equality. Then let us have a look at Law Commission's view. In 2018, we have Law Commission suggesting that Uniform Civil Code is neither necessary nor desirable, but instead you can actually codify the personal laws first, okay, and modify them in line with your fundamental rights. Okay, you can actually modify them as per the modern values, and then you can aim to establish Uniform Civil Code. So that was the Law Commission's view in 2018. But in 2024, Law Commission has actually invited public inputs on this topic. Okay, and also in 2024, Uttarakhand becomes the first state adopting Uniform Civil Code. Next, what are the arguments against Uniform Civil Code? Let us have a look. It risks the cultural diversity and religious freedom. So 84% of Indians feel that religion is very important aspect of their life as per the Pew Research study. This shows how deeply Indians are connected to their religion. So UCC probably they feel it will hamper their religious freedoms. Next, there are concerns about federal structure also. We have seen different states, especially in the Northeast, have some customary laws. Okay, and also this personal laws is a domain of concurrent list. Okay, it is not in union list. So states can also legislate on this, which may be different. So Nagaland, Mizoram, and even the 6 scheduled areas have autonomous district council which can legislate on the personal aspects. So these are different challenges to the federal structure. So UCC can be seen as a challenge by the states for their federal structure. So what are the practical challenges? UCC, which is acceptable to all, is very difficult to be framed. So there are practical challenges also. Then there is also a lack of consensus at a broader level. So it may create social unrest, especially the minorities may feel they are marginalized. So this is the risk. Then what are the arguments for Uniform Civil Code? So Article 44 already has a constitutional mandate to go for UCC. Okay, it is encouraging to adopt UCC whenever the time comes. So it also promotes secularism because irrespective of the religious faith, everyone is subjected to the same laws in their personal matters. Then we have national unity also, that is a same common law for all the personal aspects can actually foster a sense of common identity, indirectly helping in national unity. So it is actually an opportunity to align the personal laws with the modern values. Okay, it can actually address the LGBTQ community concerns also, and it promotes gender justice. Okay, even the women have equal inheritance laws and non-discrimination and also equality. That is, the focus is more on justice, equality and gender justice, non-discrimination. Okay, and simplification of the legal procedures can also happen because of this UCC, which can actually reduce lot of backlog because there are lot of litigations pending on the personal aspects. So what is the way forward? Okay, so we can end this by saying we have to develop consensus and build the public trust, especially those sections which are opposing have to be educated, and we also need to invite and conduct some public debates on this, and we need lot of political will by the government. Okay, it has to also take along the opposition, and it has to be a non-partisan approach. Okay, and also avoid any political polarization, because it is not about any particular party or religion. It is about Indians wanting to have one common law for their personal aspects. It is about equality and justice more than anything else. And then we can adopt a phased implementation. That is, especially on the already agreed aspects, we can start implementing this. That is, legal age for marriage. Actually, in Muslim personal law, the legal age is just 15 years. Okay, and even in some tribal customary laws also, the legal age for marriage is below 18 years. So we can actually start where there is already consensus that we have to abolish the child marriages. So we can start with that. Legalize the marriage age first, and then equal inheritance also have lot of consensus. That is, both women and men have to have equal rights of inheritance. So we have to also modernize the personal laws of individual faiths first before adopting any common uniform civil code. So that can also be done. Then some sections, like especially tribals or minorities, may have some grievances. So to address them, we can incorporate some institutional mechanism also to build their public trust. Okay, and modern values, justice, equality, non-discrimination should be more emphasized rather than uniformity. So here uniformity is not the concern. The concern is this: modern values, that is justice, equality, non-discrimination should be prioritized and emphasized. Then we can also have evidence-based reform. That is, we can make the Uniform Civil Code an evidence-based reform. How? By studying the existing cases like Goa and Uttarakhand. So that's how we can conclude this. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to Abhiram IAS Academy.